Here we are. It's 10:34 on March 8th, 1994, and we're videotaping.
1995.
Oh, it is 1995, and I've got it set on. Oh my goodness. I'm here today with Dot Cain, who is the niece of Marietta Johnson, and married to the nephew of Marietta Johnson, right? No? Okay, tell me. You tell me.
My husband was Marietta Johnson's foster son.
Okay, let me start over. Okay, I'm here today with Dot Cain, and she's going to tell us everything she knows about Fairhope, or at least some of what she knows about Fairhope. And I'll let you talk, Dot, and I'll hush.
Well, before we started this, Flo told me some of what she'd gotten from her other interviews, and apparently there's a lot they haven't gotten. And one thing we discussed was what is remembered by those of us who went through the deepest of the Depression in Fairhope. But she also thought it might be well for me to give just a little background about our family. My maiden name was Beiser, B-E-I-S-E-R.
We're here today, or I'm here today, with Dot Cain, who has been in Fairhope a long, long time, and who's going to tell us a lot of what she knows about Fairhope's history. Go ahead, Dot.
Flo and I discussed before we into this some of what hasn't been told on her previous interviews, and I guess there's a lot that hasn't been told. So I'll give a little on some of the areas in which she requested, and also told me that almost nothing had been said in detail. And to give a little background on myself, Mother and Dad actually were homesteaders in Baldwin County, but originally they had come from Illinois.
What part of Baldwin County did they homestead?
Dad's people were up at the headwaters of Fly Creek out of Loxley, and Mother's people were over in the Fish River, the lower area, around the River Park area. But Mother had not come as a girl. Her family had, but she stayed in Chicago. They both had heard, after they were married, they had heard Marietta Johnson, the founder of the organic school, give a lecture. And they were so impressed by it. They wanted a large family, so they said, well, what is our priority? And of course they said education. Well, Dad by that time had become very well established in Loxley and had the general store and was doing very well, and also still had retained up to a point the homestead, and then moved on into Loxley and built a lovely home. I was the third of the 6 children, so I feel very blessed and fortunate to think that Mother and Dad came to Fairhope because of Marietta Johnson in the school, and they came well before I was even kindergarten age, and I am now 81 and a half.
Wonderful.
Dad, they rented the first year, but Dad immediately bought out Wheeler Mercantile Company, which was a general store, and it was on the corner.
Whoops, telephone. Okay, go answer the phone. I'll cut it off.
Now I've got it.
Okay.
We had a little interruption there. The phone rang. So Dad, in buying the store, the Wheeler Mercantile Company, he never changed the name of the store, and he bought it from 2 old gentlemen.
Before you get any farther, tell us what your family name was, your father's name.
Beiser, B-E-I-S-E-R.
And his first name?
Felix.
Felix
was Rosamond, yeah.
Okay.
And the Wheeler Mercantile Company store was on the southeast corner of Fairhope Avenue and Section Street. I think the store in 1995 is called Uptown or something. It's one of our boutique deals. And it was a general store, 2 stories, and you got your staples and your gourmet foods and all downstairs, from feeds and anything that is needed for homes today. Then upstairs was silk stockings and hats and silk dresses, etc. and very, very popular and very well patronized. Dad went into business with Mother's brother, Ralph Young. They were partners. And immediately across the street, catty corner across the street, was Pittman. And they had a similar store, only one story and not the fancy.
And that's the
Not really the gourmet foods and not any of the apparel sort of thing.
northwest corner, right?
That's the northwest corner, yes. And then down Fairhope Avenue, on the south side, H.P. Kemper, Henry, also had a grocery store, which was not near the magnitude of Dad's. But back to why we came, because of Marietta Johnson in the school. So Dad, we rented from an old family, an old town name of Powell. They were very influential in Fairhope and very helpful and very into the community things. And it was a lovely apartment, and it was on the corner of Church and Delmar, on the southeast corner.
Did you say when you came to Fairhope? What year?
Well, they could figure that out if I'm 81 and a half, and I was here well before I got into school.
I don't think you said that on tape.
Yeah.
Your age was not on tape, it was in talking to me. Okay, but 81 and a half.
Yeah. And we came over, the whole family. Daddy sold out, I think was very brave of him, and gave up a beautiful home. He was not familiar with the Henry George philosophy, but later he certainly didn't oppose it in any way. But he bought a whole city block, which now has, it's on Section Street and White and Nichols. The entire block. And the single taxers, he was known as a land hog, because they didn't believe that he should be having that much land. But he fenced the back half of the block, built a barn, and we could choose any pet we wanted as long as we cared for it. However, with help, of course, I had to have a horse, but we had every imaginable kind of pet. And then Dad's built a beautiful home, so we only had to rent that 1 year. And very large, very lovely. And in those days we didn't have swimming pools, but we had a beautiful fish pond. And we had a tennis court. And Mother and Dad, understanding really very deeply Marietta Johnson's philosophy and wanted to be wonderful parents, so they wanted all the children to play at our place, and they certainly did. And it was a wonderful, wonderful growing up. Dad's one interesting thing too, his place was known for its beauty of his plantings, and Bellingraph Gardens paid Dad, and even this, as the Depression was coming on, they paid Dad $1,000 a year for cuttings from his azaleas. Bellingraph Gardens azaleas were started from Dad's cuttings.
Wow.
They did that 1 year. The second year they came back, Dad had gone fishing, and he was not there to supervise it. And they mutilated the bushes.
Oh,
so he didn't allow them to come back, and I can remember Mother saying, "Oh, but Felix, we need that money." And Dad says, "We never need that kind of money to destroy anything that we have developed so beautifully." I'm not going to talk much about the school. Maybe they'd like to take me another time, because that is, to me,
that's a subject, several hours all in itself.
Oh, yes, yes. And those who will see this tape and know that there is a Marietta Johnson Museum, which is in the Bell Building on the Faulkner Community College campus, can come in and get the whole history. But back to our personal history. Barton, I think this is an interesting story. There's a lot of sadness in it, but I'm sure it's understandable. As the Depression came to us, Barton Greer came over to Dad, of course by boat. There was no way over except by boat. And he very frankly stated what he was going to do, and he warned Dad. He said, "Now, Mr. Beiser, I'm going to start a store. I'm going to bring a store into Fairhope, and it's going to be a cash and carry." And Dad said, "I don't know what you mean by that." And he said, "Well, it's just what it says. You come in, and you buy your groceries, you carry them out, and you pay cash." And Dad says, "Well, Mr. Greer, that's nice of you to tell me that, but that won't hurt my business. Well, I have customers that'll call me from Point Clear, and they'll say, 'Mr. Beiser, we need a yeast cake, 3 cents. And the truck goes out and delivers a yeast cake. And of course I charge. And I have all these fancy groceries. But I wish you success.'" And Mr. Greer said, "Mr. Beiser, this depression is going to get deeper, and I think you're going to find that people will be using my store in preference to yours." Well, when you came into Wheeler Mercantile Company, you had a clerk that immediately came to you, and you walked around with the clerk, and he helped you select what you wanted. He carried it out, either carried it or it went by truck. It was delivered, all free delivery. It was charged, and you had the most wonderful, courteous help.
Well, that's sure gone with when.
That's gone. That's been gone. Well, as the Depression deepened, it was very, very sad to Dad, to all of us really, in that those beautiful cars would come up from Point Clear with the chauffeurs, and the ladies would get out, and they would come out, or the chauffeurs would be carrying out all the staples, and they would have paid cash. They'd walk across the street. I don't know whether I told you where Greer's was. It was on the south section, on the corner of Section and Delamar. No, on the north side. Very nice building. And they'd walk across the street, and they would come in and get all their fancy groceries, maybe go upstairs and buy their silk clothes or whatever, and put it on the books. Everything was charged. And of course that bankrupted Dad.
Oh, boy.
There were friends that tried to help, and it didn't only happen, I think the saddest thing of all to Dad was it wasn't just the Point Clear rich. We called that the Gold Coast in those days. These were the people that lived down around the Point Clear Hotel, that area, which is still, of course, the area. But it was also the Fairhope people. And they had run up big accounts and could not pay. Some of those names I wouldn't even want to repeat, because I remember when Dad came home, and he told Mom, he said, I was there. I stayed home because I was studying, very seriously, I was studying music and going into Mobile to study, and so I was there. But I remember him saying, "Rose, I don't owe anyone, and I have salvaged the old truck." We didn't even have a car. "I've salvaged the old truck and dried beans and toilet tissue." And I remember Mother laughing, and she said, "Felix, that's some kind of a combination." And that was very, very difficult for Mother and Dad at that period.
And so he just closed the store?
He just closed the store, right, yeah. The old Wheelers, the two old Wheeler brothers that lived back here on Oswald Street, that lovely old home is still there. In fact, relatives of theirs were here just last week and asking me what I could tell about them. They wanted to go get pictures of the old home and all. But then as Ken and I were married during this stuff, we were married in 1935. I graduated in 31. Now Kenneth was, probably this has already been told, but Kenneth was the foster son of Marietta Johnson. I was privileged to go through the entire school, and then the 2 years of teacher's training. And then I was never on faculty per se, but it seemed like they always needed me. So I was being asked if I would come in. Maybe the First Life teacher had, in Thanksgiving, had gone off and gotten married, or somebody else was not going to be able to come back, or they were ill. So I was in and out and doing much of the music throughout the school, and loving all of it. Even after the two boys were born, 1939 and 1940. That sounds as if they were a year apart. They actually were 2 years apart. But back to the Depression, and Kenny and I were married in the deepest of it, and we were living in the school home with Mrs. Johnson at the time of our marriage. But then we did rent. I won't go into the details of this, but there's a lot of sadness in that and stress. But we did rent for 1 year. And then Mrs. Johnson wanted to live with us, and she put a down payment on this very house I'm in, which is now 59 years, and wanting to live with us. She had a living son, but he had married a New Englander, and they were in New Jersey, and she didn't want to leave her work here, of course. And she loved her niece, that was her secretary for years, Esther Frederick. And Esther and Paul were such wonderful people, Mr. Frederick. But they were having some marital problems, and Aunt Nettie felt that it was better that she not asked to live with them. And she loved Kenny so dearly, and of course we were very honored she wanted to live with us. But she couldn't move in because the house was, she had a heart condition. The house had one bathroom, it was upstairs, and there were a lot of stairs involved because we're on kind of a little hillside here. But we were planning to build on for her, which is what she wanted, and Ken could do anything. Ken could have built it. But during that Depression time, this will seem unreal to especially young people today. I want to go back just to our marriage. We were not to be married until spring, but we were in the school home. I was living in the school home as assistant school home mother, and of course Ken was school home father with his teaching duties, and I was doing the music throughout school. And we had agreed we wouldn't get married in the spring. But during the Christmas holidays, all of the children would go home, and there would just be a very skeleton group of us living in school home, Mrs. Johnson, Kenny and I, the Fredericks, and their two little boys, Pearson and Paul. And Mrs. Johnson said, I don't know why you used to wait till spring. Come into the office, I want to talk to you. She had her own private office on the south side of the school home, and then there was the school office over in the northeast part of the school home. So when it was her private office, you know it was very serious. So she said so preciously, she said, I don't know why you should wait till spring. Why don't we go get married now? Why don't we go get married?
We go. I love it.
So we were very agreeable to this. And then she said, this might embarrass some people to tell this part of it, but I think it's necessary to be told because it shows how history and what's happening to the world today. But she said, we can't have a baby. We can't afford a baby.
Now here
I remember we're talking think how things have changed. We're talking 1935. And she said to me, Dorothy, you know what to do not to have a baby? And I said, no. And she said, Ken, do you know what to do not to have a baby? And he said, not really. Well, here we had been going together for some years. And she said, well, there's no problem with that. Dr. Mershon, who later became a psychiatrist, we have a videotape on Ronald, she said he has just finished a course in birth control, correspondence course. So Dorothy, I've already made an appointment for you to go see him.
Oh,
I
wonderful.
said, oh no. Now, here I was, almost 24, I'd never even been to a doctor. Oh yes. Well, she could be very definite, and if we wanted to get married, that's the way we'd have to get married. So I went to Ronald. His Mrs. Johnson's niece, Florence Emma Pierce, was Ronald's wife, and I think it was as embarrassing for her. She was his assistant, and poor Ronald and I, all three of us, I guess we all wanted to just die. But that's the condition on which...
Oh, I love it.
That's the condition on which we were married. So we lived in the school home then through that spring. And then we had to go out and rent, much to Aunt Mettie's dismay. She was going north to raise money to open the school hopefully in that fall. We were that desperate about finances. The school home charges had been reduced so that some of them could come back. Many of them could not come back to school home. They could not afford it.
Let me say here and now that the school home was the dormitory and all for the students,
Yes, the
and some
part.
of the teachers lived there too.
Yes.
I know that's on other tapes, but we'll just throw it in case
Yeah.
we haven't mentioned it.
Yeah, that's so true. And it was so popular in the days before that we were even sleeping them in the attic. And they were paying, even in really as the Depression approached, they were paying as much as $1,000 a year, which was unheard of in those days. And we had them coming not only from all over the United States, we even had a couple from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very prestigious, and it was a wonderful thing for us to have too, because it brought these wealthy people and sophisticated sort of children into mingling with us, who would come barefoot and bring our dogs and one thing or another.
Right.
You know. It was really very good for a wonderful exposure to all types, all kinds. And in going to the school and having to rent, nothing was selling, of course, in those days. And we were paying $15 a month rent. I have a friend now who's just come here, and she's renting, and she's paying $1,100 a month.
Oh my!
For a home. It's not one of the very best homes in Fairhope either, and it was unfurnished at that time. But in going and able to survive, no work, absolutely no work. We were able to take one of the students from the school. She was in as a teacher's training student, which was a 2-year course like a normal course. And she had a problem, an emotional problem, which we didn't quite understand. And she was older than I. She was a good student. In fact, she'd enrolled in Daphne Normal to continue her studies through that summer. Very good student. But I was conscious that she had an emotional problem. One day, my duties in the school home was to set the tables. That was earning my board and keep, so to speak. And one day she came in just as supper. I had set all the tables for the supper hour, and she walked in, had this strange look in her eyes, and proceeded to dump all the dishes on the floor.
Oh my
No
goodness.
explanation. Every table, one table to the other. Fortunately, no food had come out. So she needed a place to stay for the summer, and Aunt Meddy, I call Mrs. Johnson Aunt Meddy, Kenneth called her Ma Johnny, asked if we would take her. And we agreed, and her brother, who was a dentist in Jacksonville, Florida, was her custodian, and we knew that the money was going to be secure, and she would pay $15 a week, which was terrific.
Yeah.
And then there was another one that needed a home or a bed, and she was going to pay $1 a week for just room. She wasn't to eat with us. But who could take a girl into your home and not feed her? So
Right.
of course she ate with us.
Well, tell me what caused the girl to throw the dishes on the floor.
Well, we didn't know what her problem was, but she
Okay.
definitely had some problems. And one thing was that she was a bedwetter.
Oh,
she
so
was a
she
good
really
student.
had some emotional problems.
I'm sure so.
Okay.
But in those days, I was sure there was something physically wrong with her.
Uh-huh.
But we had a good time, and Kenny left a couple of times through that summer. He fixed the little house up. The house is still on Fells Avenue, and hasn't changed much. But he could do anything, and so the owners would be glad to pay for materials, and he would fix them up. And of course, stupidly, if anything at all sold in Fairhope, that would be it to sell. So we actually had 3 moves that first year, because we'd fix up and it would sell. But Mrs. Johnson was so anxious to have a home with us. So she still had in her mind that she was going to somehow manage a home. So after our 3rd move, during our 2nd move, things really looked good. Ken had gotten a little job on Main Street, and my class was excellent. My studio work was good. I had the church position, which I had for years and years. We had Cecile at $15 a week, and we had Margie for $1 a week. So Aunt Betty says, all right, things look good. I have an architect friend, and we're drawing plans, and we're going to build a house. Well, it shows how you must live just each day.
Yes.
And not, I think it's wise, of course, to plan, but you must not be frustrated so much with planning when things don't go as you think they should go. So the custodian of Cecile, her brother, wanted her to overcome this bedwetting. And so he would write, we didn't have telephones, he would write and he would say, he said to me, if Cecile's going to continue to live with you, I am demanding that she wash her own linen, because there's nothing wrong with her, because I had begged him to have her examined. I thought physically there must be a problem. But he would reply there was none, that she had been examined. And he says she lies there and she reads, I know, and she's too lazy to go to the bathroom, so she is to wash her own linen. Well, I knew if she was to continue to live with us, I had no choice. So sure enough, the next morning, of course, the bed was wet. So I stripped it and I put her, and I don't suppose some of you who've seen this would know that during those days we had big wash tubs in the backyards, and we washed by hand.
Right.
We had wash tubs. So I put her sheets into soak, and I was teaching when she came in that afternoon, and I said, Cecile, you wet the bed last night. She said, yes, I know. And I said, well, you are to rinse your sheets out and put them on the line. She didn't say anything. She went back, disappeared. She came out with a butcher knife. I don't know. And she had that look in her eyes that I remembered seeing when she was tipping those tables over.
Good.
And she said, I'm going to kill you.
Oh my
And of course I had the presence of mind to run, and I began to scream.
Were
your
student still in the house?
The student ran too. I told the student to just run.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, so she was chasing me, and they got word to Ken to come home. So he came home, and of course what he had to do was to subdue her and take her to a hotel. We had a hotel in those years called the Dewdrop Inn, I think the thing was called, or maybe the Dixie Hotel. It was owned by my uncle, who had been in business with Dad, and put her there for the night, and then wired the brother, called him, whatever, and said she would be home the next day. Well, that was the end of poor Cecile. I always felt very bad about it, though, because I really felt I could work with her. Kenny lost his job the next week.
Oh my goodness.
So we had to report all this to Marietta Johnson. Now, these are the Depression days, remember. And she said, well, we better postpone building the house for a while. We had leased a colony lot, actually, on Cliff Drive. So that, we limped through some of that, and then talking about the food, Kenny couldn't forget work. And they rightfully...
And where had he lost his job?
It was a little sweet shop on the north side of Fairhope Avenue, about where the barber shop is now.
Okay. Was that the tea towel, or?
No, the tea towel was on the other side on the corner. The tea towel always did. And the tea towel was earlier than that, when I was still in high school. But I was, in order to help the business survive, I was making sour cream donuts and just donating them. I'd get up at 5 o'clock and do the donuts for the shop, and donating them, and so that Kenny could sell them, there would be a little more profit, so that help the business stay intact. And I don't know whether it's been told, and I think it should be in the history of it. Marie Howland lost her mind, our librarian, before she died. E.B. Gaston lost his mind the year before Marietta Johnson died, 1937.
What ages were they?
Well, Marietta Johnson died at 74. E.B. was probably not much older. And it was so sad. He wandered the streets. Everybody loved him and respected him. And he would come in and he would say very normally to Ken, a recognized Ken, good morning, Ken. And then he would go to the donuts and he would eat a donut. Then he'd eat a second donut. And he did a third donut. And say, thank you, Ken, and walk out. Well, Ken didn't tell me for a while. But then when he told me, And I said, and did he always just stop at 3? And Ken said, no, sometimes he ate 4. And I said, and I won't fix any more donuts. He's eating all the profit.
Mm-hmm.
But that was,
and he didn't realize he hadn't paid.
Oh, no, of course not.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. But we couldn't really afford that either.
Right, right.
And these are things that stick in your mind because things were so bad and you were so hungry. Of course, while we had Cecile, that $15 was really pretty adequate for food.
Mm-hmm.
There was a man that lived right across from, in our third move now, before Aunt Mitty bought this little house. His name was Cassidy, and he lived right across from the school, and he had a cabbage patch. And he would sell me a head of cabbage for a nickel.
Mm.
And I can remember as if it was yesterday, walking up each morning and taking quite a while to pick out the head of cabbage.
There goes the phone. You're back.
Another interruption, another phone call. I would take a long time to find that biggest head of cabbage. And then Kenny's sister, who also lived across from the school, they had a cow, and they would sell us a gallon of milk for, I don't remember what, something like a dime. Of course, we had no refrigeration, so the milk would clabber, but we had cabbage, and we had clabber. And Dad was selling spices, what was it called? Raleigh, I guess. And he would let me have spices. And we would gather sand pears.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of sand pears left. They're very hard, and people now don't want to have to peel sand pears, but they really take the place of apples. And so I'd go to the butcher shop and get free suet, and then the pears and the spices, and I managed raisins somehow. I don't imagine how in the world I bought raisins, but I made the best mincemeat.
Mm. And
I managed some shortening, so we lived on cabbage, clabber, and mincemeat pie. And those are 3 of my favorite foods today.
I'll bet.
Believe it or not. That went on while we were still renting this third little house, and my lessons, although I gave a lot of lessons, but it was more like a barter. And you get rotten eggs and sick chickens, and it was lots of times you got nothing.
Yeah.
So that was very, very difficult. And then the church paid me 50 cents a service.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think they pay like 75 and 100.
Oh my.
And then they expected a little bit back, into the plate.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't want anyone to have to go through that. That's degrading. That is not right.
Yeah, that's true.
And of course there was certainly no thought of trying to have a child through that. It would not have been right. But then when Aunt Nettie came back from her very strenuous lecturing, but she always managed to raise enough money to get that school open again in September.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when she, well, not immediately, but it was an interesting thing too. We walked. You didn't have any money to go to the movies or do anything, but you didn't need to. It was wonderful. We had the bay and the pier, and we walked a lot. And Ken and I used to walk out in this area, which was called the Edel subdivision at the time, and there were no houses at all, except this little thing and the house immediately south of us, because those are the only 2 lots that sold during this auction deal. And then the big thing, the old Allen place that we call the Ark. Those were these things in all this mass of woods out here. And we used to love to walk this area, and this little thing was under fence. It had a loquat tree out in the front and a few scrubby pines. And this was early May, and that loquat tree was loaded with green loquats. And Kenny said, there's no one living there, and nobody's going to care. Let's pick those loquats. I guess it was in April. And we did, all green. He said, they'll ripen. A week later, the place was ours, and we could have let them stay.
Oh,
ripen. Of course, they
you
never
bought
did.
them.
They never did ripen, and we've often laughed about
I wondered because I used to eat them out of the tree at home, and I didn't know they would ripen if you picked them.
They won't.
They won't, okay.
No, they won't. So that was, we always laughed about that. I don't know whether I've given you enough story about the Depression and what had happened.
Well, we're up to almost up to World War II. You want to go into that?
Well, that was quite a lot later, Flo. See, remember, we're talking, well, not that much later. We're talking in the...
Well, I thought things were pretty tough up until World War II.
Well, the Depression lingered here. There wasn't much industry, much of anything. That's true. I've had to weekly walk to Mama's and borrow the iron.
Oh, wow.
To do my ironing. My neighbor borrowed the broom. She couldn't afford a broom.
My goodness.
There wasn't any such thing. We had no, remember there was no, there were no telephones. There were no cars to speak of. There were no paved streets. And to those of us...
we had a telephone.
Well, as a little girl, you're a lot younger than I. Sure.
Yeah, but no, that was in the 1930s.
Well, we didn't have our first car until into the 40s.
Well, I guess there was a telephone system in Fairhope, but not everybody had phones.
Yes, that's could be very true. And then your current went off at midnight there for a long time. Kenny worked in the city plant.
Oh, wow, I didn't know about that.
And Buddy, my brother, who's 7.5 years younger than I, and I'll never forget the doctor saying, and Mother was very incensed over it, he said, Mrs. Beiser, are you sure the lamps are well cleaned? Because we'll be here through the night. And it incensed Mother because her lamps were always clean. But she said, Doctor, you will be home in bed by midnight. I will too, and the baby will have come. Mother was right. Buddy had come quite before midnight, and it wasn't unusual for Mother to be up the next morning after the birth of the baby.
Amazing.
She had no problems with her water, and they were spaced 2 years apart. Helen and I are 3 years because she had a miscarriage trying to move the grand piano, and so she waited a year. I never had the courage to ask Mother what she did in order to space us 2 years apart. In those years, they must have known something.
Must have.
But they certainly didn't know about birth control. No. During those war years, I don't remember much about the news and listening because it was so distressful to think that you were even going to survive here at home. And the boys were, as I said, were born in late 1930, early 1939, and then late 1940. So they are the 2 years apart. And that's when we bought the soda garden. Ken had tried many things. See, he didn't finish his formal education because when he was a sophomore at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa was the year that Charles Raybould was killed. And Charles Raybould was the one Marietta Johnson really counted on to carry on the philosophy as it should be carried on, and he was very capable of it. And I'm sure that she was expecting, and well, I know he would stay. He left a very prominent position at Yale because he heard Mrs. Johnson speak just one time in New York, and he heard her, and he came to her after the dress, and he said, Mrs. Johnson, I want to come to Fairhope and work for you. And she said, oh, Mr. Raybould, we can't afford you. And he said, I'm not talking about what you can pay me, I'm coming. And he did, and he was with us until he had that tragic.
Oh, and how did he get killed?
He was flying with his accompanist, Mrs. Bumfalk, Mrs. Botstein, to San Diego to teach a folk dancing class. Not to demonstrate it with the students, but he was just going to teach it. And Aunt Mittie had gone with him. And they wanted to take a little side trip and go into Mexico, and Aunt Mittie just didn't feel that she should go. Thank God she didn't, because he and Mrs. Botstein were killed in a plane crash.
Oh my goodness, so that was before Aunt Mittie died.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Oh,
my.
yes. That was in well before she died. That was in the dates are all there in the museum. It had to be, let me see, 29 probably.
29.
Yeah. And she died
Okay, that was,
in 38.
yeah.
Or it might have been even 28. So you can imagine, there's another thing in the museum where we have probably not all of them, but there are hundreds of listed places, what date and where she lectured, including your own.
Oh, good.
And when you read it, you think this has got to have been made up. No human being could have kept that kind of schedule, especially in the days when you had to go by train. But she did it indeed.
Mm-hmm.
She had a tremendous amount of vitality and energy, and of course such a dedication to this. And I'd like to just insert here, Flo, she lectured and spoke in such a way that when she got through, you'd give her your shoes if you didn't even have a spare pair. But she never wanted to take time to write. Now, she wrote a lot of just things for publications, but she didn't want to write books. But you know, we do have 2 that she's written.
Mm-hmm.
And they will be available and are available to a point now, and working to make them more available. But she always called her philosophy an experiment. And even though Henry Ford offered to subsidize her, Mrs. Ford many times set up lectures for her in that area around Detroit. And she had a lot of money that was coming in from those sources. But Henry Ford, in the real bad times, later years, Ken would say, "Ma, Johnny, you just should have accepted it." She said, "No, Ken, I couldn't do that." He wanted to set up a board. Well, if you've ever worked with a board, you know what she meant.
Mm-hmm.
She had to have the control at the time because she said this is an experiment. And I'm not sorry she did that, but she was the only one in all my research of educational philosophers, including John Dewey. John Dewey only had his school for 8 years, and he was back by Columbia. Marietta Johnson's the only one, to my knowledge, that actually stayed in demonstrating it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a terrific thing for her to have done. And she was probably a woman of the greatest wisdom that I could ever imagine. And what a privilege to have lived with her so intimately. One story Ken used to tell that I loved. She was lecturing to give a 15-minute talk in the Armory in New York. Huge place. And she was the 3rd speaker. Ken was with her. And the first speaker got up, and there was no attention given to him. There was noisy and confusion and talking. And Kenny was nervous for her. And the second speaker got up for his 15 minutes. It was just as bad. And Kenny said, "I just wish she wouldn't even go out."
Oh.
But he said, "Dot, she walked out, and I don't think she stood there 1 minute. But with that magnificent voice she had, and a hush fell over the room. And he said she spoke for those 15 minutes. You couldn't have heard a pin drop, and she had a standing ovation."
Mm-mm.
Now that was the way she could speak, but she didn't want to take time to put it down, you know,
Yeah.
to write it. Flo, I don't know. I'm just rambling around here. What else do you want?
Okay, well, what about World War II?
Well, as I made the statement, now we had bought a place on Main Street, and it's where the Press Register is on Fairhope Avenue, on the south side, and it's where the Press Register office is now, which is one door down from the pharmacy. By the way, the pharmacy was still there in that place when Dad had Wheeler Mercantile come.
Mm-hmm.
Then we bought right next to that, which was the bank at that time, was the bank. And the bank president, by the way, was Kirby Wharton, a graduate of the organic school, and he was the youngest bank president in the United States at the time. Uh, I didn't want Ken to buy it. It was a hole. It was just a sorry place. It was called the Soda Garden because really what it was just a bar, a beautiful bar of sweets and banana splits and all the stuff. And that was about it. But I didn't want him to do it. And I said, Kenny, I'm very familiar with that business. I've dated everyone that ever worked in there. I've dated the owners. I know what it's all about, and it's not for us. You'll never have to come and help me. I know I can do it business. Well, he bought it, and we mortgaged the home more deeply. And the man who let us have the money, and I knew him, and he said, if you miss one payment, I'd take your home, and he would have.
Oh.
So there was little Jeffrey at 2 and Kenny at 4. And so Kenny said, no, you'll be a mother just as you've always known that it should be. Well, we were there 6 months and it looked like we were going to go under. And it was awfully hard on him to have to come home and ask me to come.
So what did you do with the children?
In those days, there was no such thing as child care.
That's right.
You were dependent on whatever you could get. If it hadn't been for Mom and Dad, they still had the great big wonderful place. I don't think I could have survived it. They just loved them dearly. But I thought it was a bit much for Mother and Dad to care for them as often as they did, so we always tried. We even had, as small as the house was, Flo, the room we're sitting in was a bedroom at that time from there to there.
Mm-hmm.
That was supposed to have been living room and dining room and this little kitchen. And we had a Negro live in, and she lived in this room. They loved her, old Annie, and but the Negroes are never that stable that long. I mean, after all, they want their own kind, and she was night and day living here. She was a heavy smoker, and in those days tobacco just wasn't. But the little bit that the Soda Garden was allotted, we just brought home to Annie. When the house
that's right, because of the rationing during the war?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And she was sloppy, she was dirty, and there were ashes in the food. But she loved those babies, and she was good. And that was probably the best and the happiest time I had for their care, other than, of course, Mom and Dad. But she was out setting an old cook, and they were in the yard, and they loved her dearly, and she was very, very good to them. And she fed them well. She was a good cook and all. So there was some peace of mind of that. But we went through a lot of very difficult. And I know it's difficult for parents today that are putting their children in child care.
Absolutely.
Care because the child care things, some of them should be closed.
That's true, and also if the child gets sick, that's the worst of it.
Oh, yes.
What is the
I have
parent
a dear
do?
friend now that is just distraught over what she's having to go through. And I'm going to backtrack just a minute on that because I gave a talk at a request to, I guess there were parents, I guess. And I foresaw this coming, that the women of Fairhope were going to be women of the world were going to be working. So I said at that particular time, I foresee this happening. And when you do, what are you going to do with your children? Because I had experienced this. And of course, there were going to be the child care, and they talked, and they were, oh, everything's going to be fine. And I said, well, if we must come to that, then I feel the child care centers should be done as they do them in Russia. Wow. That wasn't a very good thing to say, because at that time, anything communistic, was
Absolutely.
taboo. And what I said, I have researched this, and the child care centers in Russia are done by, it's true, it's done by government, but those caregivers are trained in early childhood development. And Flo, it's true today in that I videotaped the Russian who left Fairhope when he was 18, Dan Edwards, to go to Russia, became a Russian citizen. He came back after 60 years, just a few months ago, and I videotaped him, and I talked to him extensively about how this thing was done in Russia, as his children were put into them, and now his grandchildren, and he said it's just exactly what you said. They have magnificent care under wonderful supervision. But, oh, that group were very upset. In fact, I was considered pink after that meeting.
Well, of course.
They never said I was red, but I was pink. And of course, this is what's happened. That in our nursing homes is a scandalous, horrible story. Well, where was I getting to? And getting diverted on that.
Well, we were getting to World War II.
Well, yes, and with the children, the babies. So that was probably one of the most difficult things for me to do, was to leave those babies under those conditions. And there was nothing all through the back here, just the woods again, and a little trail getting out to where the Methodist church is now. So there was no traffic until we got to Morphy. And I'd take their little hands, and they would walk with me out to that corner. Then they didn't have any streets to cross. And then they would be waving to me, "Goodbye, Mommy, I love you," and throwing me kisses, and I would be walking backwards and waving to them and telling them I love them. And Henry Bishop was a cashier in the bank, and he came in one morning, and he said, "Dottie, have you got a minute? I need to talk to you." And I said, "Sure." And he said, "You're doing something that I wish you could handle some other way." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, every morning," he lived in the big, the bishops lived in this big block house that is still there on the west side of Section Street, right next to what it would be, I guess, the flower market on the corner there. And his mother-in-law and his wife would stand at the window upstairs and watch this scene and cry.
Oh, my goodness.
And they said no mother should have to leave her children that loves those babies so much. And you just got to stop that.
Oh.
Because I leave and they're crying. I come to the bank and they're crying, you know. Those were very difficult times. Then
Did you stop?
No, I didn't stop.
Okay.
But then the war had its turnaround. Things got worse. And so the draft then began to come in and get the married men with children. So I got my letter at the post office, which is now the courier office building. And I remember opening the thing and reading the greetings. Dad was in there, and I burst out crying.
Your father? Oh, my goodness.
No, for Ken. But Dad was in the store when I opened the letter.
For Ken, okay.
And Ken was working in the shipyards.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was running the soda garden, see. And we'd had the shortage of sugar, so we couldn't get ice cream. We couldn't make ice cream. We couldn't have the sweets. So I had to turn it into a restaurant, of which I did. And in those days, there was no cafeteria in the store, in the schools. And the high school was where the kindergarten building is now on Church Street. And they would get out, and they would there would be a line from the school all the way to the door of the soda garden for their lunches. We fed all of them. And the town was so considerate. The bank and the businessmen along the whole area would come in early enough for their coffee to be out of the way as the school would come, and then they'd come in for their lunch after the school was gone. They were very considerate. And I was very severe, Flo, to make this thing work. I had to make it work. And we had 3 shifts because we were open 7 days a week from 7 till 11. And there was a shift in the morning. I had to be in the summertime because they were school kids. And I won't name names, but if they ever watch this tape, they'll remember who they were. They decided that they were going to pay me a lesson because I had made a ruling that they could not go to the telephone and talk to their boyfriend while they were on duty at great lengths. They were supposed to be working. That angered them. So they planned a little walkout strike, which they did. And they walked out mid-morning. Well, the men came in for their coffee, and all the businessmen, including the bank people, and on down the south way of Section and down Fairhope Avenue. And they said, "Dot, where's all your help?" And I said, "Oh, they all walked out on me." "What are you going to do for lunch?" I said, "I don't know. I'll do the best I can." And remember, we had no paper goods. Everything had to be washed, you know. And I said, and when I can't handle anymore, I'll have to shut the door. And the poor kids will have to go hungry. I'll do the best I can. And they just shook their head and walked out. And Flo, it wasn't 15 minutes later, they all came back, including the president of the bank. They took their coats off. They rolled up their sleeves.
Oh,
Put us in our positions. We had more fun. They were
cute.
pumping root beer instead of Coke, and they were giving a hot dog instead of hamburgers. They were dishing chicken soup instead of vegetable and whatever. Everybody took. We had the most fun, and everybody got fed. Everybody was just having a wonderful
that's
time.
a cute story.
And of course, when the kids came back and wanted their job, I said, oh no. I had 86 employees that first year, because if they got out of, in any way, I fired them. And then I got the reputation, if you're going to go there, you better behave yourself, because that woman's hard-boiled and she'll fire you. And I got a wonderful crew, and that year I paid off the business. But it was rough.
Yeah.
And I never did. But I'm so happy in that it got around too, the parents would come in and they'd say, well, Susie said that she couldn't order a dessert because she hadn't eaten her parsley. And I'd say to the children, you must eat your parsley and you must eat all of that. So they were good days. We didn't make as much money as we should have, I suppose. We were a bit too generous. We were feeding some that we knew couldn't pay and that sort of thing. But it was 9 years of it. And
that's a long time. Well, I remember even, I was too young in the early 40s when you first bought it, but I remember later on, 44.
It was a place to come in and meet your boyfriend.
Well, there was that, and it was a place just to go and get. I was always hungry, so that was a good place for me to go. I got something to eat.
Yeah, and I did see that the food was good.
Yes, it
and
was
I did
good.
all of the cooking.
It was good.
I made all the cakes and all the pies and all the everything from scratch. And then I worked it out where I would be home when the children came from school. And then I'd start the baking here. And everybody playing here, which was wonderful the way I wanted it. And then in the mixmaster and dating, and then we would draw straws for who was going to lick the beaters. And the kids would line up for licking the beaters, and I remember what fun they used to have, and then I'd scald them and then start the next cake, this sort of thing. You know. So the boys don't remember any hardship. We had a wonderful playroom for them in the back. But another interesting story, and I had some beautiful experiences too. Jeffrey, the younger one, he would get bored with what was in the playroom, and he would come out. And this is when they were very small, because remember I started this when Jeffrey was only 2. And he must have been 4 or 5 when this went on. But he'd time himself to come out when I was really busy and be naughty. And I would stop and take him back and talk to him. And that particular time was during lunch period. The third time he came out, and I still just talked with him and explained how Mommy just couldn't come back and be with him right now. And he must be a good boy and stay back there. And when I came back out, there had been an elderly gentleman, well, not elderly, but portly and very Jewish looking, and he'd come in every day for lunch. And this would happen, and then I wouldn't see him for 3 or 4 months, and he would come again. And he came up to me, he said, I'd like to talk to you if you have a minute. And I said, yes. He said, I stay at the Grand Hotel, and I guess I'm tired of that rich food. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate this home cooking and Rick coming in. But the reason I wanted to talk to you, I have with great admiration of how you handled that child. I know that must be your son. I said, yes, that's my boy. And he said, well, I want to make you an offer that I've never made before. I sell jewelry, and I only sell it wholesale, so it has to be a gross of everything. My wife is the designer. And knowing your shop, and I did have a case of real expensive perfumes and some nice things just to make the place look lovely. And there were people from Mobile that came over frequently to eat. The Gardbergs came over every Sunday to eat supper, and they would love to pick up a gift or whatever. He said, if you will accept my offer, I will guarantee to send you just one of everything my wife designs. There'll never be another like it. And I said, I accept. Well, when that offer would come, we would get telephone calls from Mobile saying, has any of the jewelry come in?
Oh, my.
And I was buying it for 50 cents and selling it for $1. And then he came back and he saw what I was doing. He said, no, no, no. He said, that's not the proper markup. I said, well, yes. I'm making 50 cents on the dollar. And he said, no, 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 that's not the way you mark it up. And he proved that that was what you had to multiply by. He said, this is the Jew in me now. But I never changed it. And that junky stuff, I mean, I always thought it was real junky, but they just fought over it. And then when Cleveland bought the soda guard from us, he said, Dot, I don't want those humbling figures. I don't want that jewelry. Just get that junk out of here. I said, well, Whitney, you bought it. I don't want it. So we brought it home. And for years, then what would happen, the children would come for their music lessons, and that's another story, how I taught, because I didn't teach like anybody else. And as they were waiting for their lessons, or wanting to stay later, they played with the jewelry. That was fun for the girls. They just go upstairs and take the jewelry. So now I wear it occasionally. They say, where did you find that expensive antique?
Oh, my goodness.
No, it is.
That's wonderful.
And of course it is, you know. But it's, so there was a lot of fun in a lot of it. And so someday, Flo, we probably, because it is Fairhope, we probably should tell on another tape, really the detailed story of the soda guard. I mean, of the Seacoast.
Yeah.
Because that is...
Now, just tell me briefly what Seacoast is, since you've mentioned it.
Well, when Ken was in the sanatorium, tuberculosis sanatorium.
And that was what, about what year?
Well, let me see, Joe. So I've bad about years. That would be in the late 50s.
Okay.
And Kenny was in Georgia Tech, the older boy, and Jeffrey was in a junior college in Mississippi. There were no junior colleges in those days.
In Alabama.
In Alabama.
That's
George
right.
Wallace gave us our junior
That's
college.
right.
And there was not a school in Alabama that would take Jeffrey to university or college because he was epileptic and his background of his physical. So that's the reason he ended up in Mississippi. And there again, that's a wonderful story of how he did and how he flourished after losing 5 years of his schooling at organic intermittently, you know, and yet how well he did. And when Ken was in a sanatorium, that's another story because of the political things that go on within what happens in such situations where they hospitalize people. And that could expose a lot of what everyone should know and how we should investigate these things. But Kenny was not dismissed. He walked out. In those days, I hope it's the same, you were not, by law, having to stay. Some states have that. Indiana did way back. Alabama was getting ready to pass it until I exposed what was going on in the 6th District over in Mobile, what a hellhole it was. Kenny would have died if he'd stayed there. So he came home, but he said when he got here, it was never to work again. The doctor said he was never to work again. And he had all kinds of offers when he got home, because Kenny was an workaholic, really, with wonderful abilities. But he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a coin-operated telescope. Oh, I've heard everything, but this is it. And he said, I need $500. And here I was struggling with Jeffrey, Kenny, and Georgia Tech. Ken not working. Of course, I loved the teaching, but it was 7 in the morning, 11 at night.
Oh, my.
And I said, yeah, Ken, who doesn't, you know? Almost my age. And I said, well, where are the drawings? He said, oh, no, I don't need drawings. It's all up here.
Oh.
Well, he comes home one day with $500. And I said, Ken. And he said, Dick Teamer, Bone Savings and Loan, let me have it. So he went through that pretty fast, and with his wonderful friend, old Mr. Patterson, who had a little machine shop out here on Edwards Avenue. And they had a glorious time, and they were doing and doing. Then he came in, he said, I need $5,000.
Oh.
So, Ken. He comes home with $5,000. So I get myself down to Dick Teamer in the Baldwin Savings and Loan. I said, no, wait a minute.
Oh, this is something.
Dick said, Dot, you all have tried so hard and you've done so much for the community, and you had so many reverses, so many problems. We had a board meeting about this, and they all voted to let Ken have anything he needed. We think he's got something. I said, well, good for you men. You hang together. I think it's a stupid thing, and I'm upset about this.
Oh.
And all the time Kenny was in the sanatorium, and can you imagine this in today's world? They came to me, Dick Teamer came to me, and he said, we know Kenny was still here. He was put to bed here because they didn't want Jeff to know until Jeff was through with that year. They were afraid of throwing him into a series of seizures. And so they put him to bed just saying he had pneumonia. Well, Dick Teamer came to the house, and he said, Dot, and I said, oh, Kenny's resting, Dick, you can't see. And Dick said, Dot, I know what's wrong with Ken. He's tubercular. I said, where did you hear that? He said, I didn't hear it, I just know he is. I'm going to talk to him. I'll never forget that wonderful man. He got up there, this is now before all this coming out, you know, the Seacoast business, and he said, Dot, I want you to hear this. He said, we, again, have had a board meeting about Ken. No one had heard that he was tubercular, but I told them I thought he probably was. And we want you to know that there will be no more payments due on the house until he's well. You will have to pay the interest. Now, can you imagine anyone doing that today?
No, I cannot.
I don't think I could have saved it.
And that was a locally owned bank, right? Or in
Savings
Baldwin
and
County,
Loan.
yeah.
Right, yeah. That really wasn't even a bank. So, but
For the savings and loan at that time,
savings and
yeah.
loan. So when I went down, I said, Dick, now wait a minute. Meeting or not, it's a debt. It has to be paid back. And you people are not supposed to loan money for repair. I mean, you're supposed to only loan money for repair of homes or to build homes, not for this sort of venture. And he said, well, you're just outvoted. Kenny's got his own. Well, Kenny built the thing from his head, got one finished, took it down to the yacht club, and I said, why are you putting down there? He said, it'll be a wonderful test, because this is where the poor little neglected children are, and they're rough, and I want to know if they can beat it to pieces. There wasn't a flaw in it, not a flaw. And so he got busy out in the backyard in an open shed, and he built 5 of those things while I stayed with him.
That is super. Can I stop you here and let us pick up later?
Oh yeah, we could go
Okay.
on forever.
All right.
And I need to meet